Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details. At Kroger, an annual Boost membership just got even better. Now you can choose from Disney Plus with ads, Hulu with ads, or ESPN Plus on us when you sign up. Plus, enjoy unlimited free delivery, double fuel points, exclusive offers, and free items. Sign up for a Boost membership today. It's an easier way to save, including new streaming options to relax with while we deliver your groceries. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. Last week, me and my guest did a movie, Passengers, and Steve has had very strong opinions on this movie. He disagreed with us very much about our positive review for the film. And just to kind of give you guys a quick rundown, it's a film that came out in 2016 and it's directed by Martin Tildum. Stars Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. And it was a very polarizing film when it first came out. So I'm not surprised that people would probably have issues with me and Chris's review of the film. But Steve has had serious issues with the film where I think we were arguing about it for so initially when we recorded the thing, Steve had seen it and we argued about it for a good 2 weeks. And then I edited it and then Steve was filling in some of the background music and stuff like that. So he ended up listening to it again. And I think we argued about it for sending messages back and forth for another 4 days about it. I'd be at the gym, in between doing bench press and stuff like that and responding to Steve's Facebook Messenger message about whatever issue he was having with the film at the time. So, but I did point out, I said, 4 days later, we're still arguing about this film. I said, that says something, does it not? So why don't you lay out what are your main issues with the film? And for the most part, from what I gathered from our interactions, it seems to be more from a storytelling aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was a really big storytelling problem with this particular movie. And like you said, when you first said you were doing this movie, I had heard of it, but I had never seen it. So this is going back a couple of weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, when you said you were going to plan to talk about this with the other Chris. And I was, I'll check out this. I like, who doesn't like Chris Pratt, Jennifer Lawrence, and a sci-fi movie? So I thought I'd check it out. And I just got so mad about this movie from beginning to end. And then we started talking about it. And I was like, I cannot believe the things that you like about it. And then when I went back and to review the episode before publishing it, the arguments that the Chris's were making was I was yelling at my computer while I was editing it. And so I think that my problems really, they break down into storytelling and then also some of your interpretations of it. And I think that's how we'll kind of go with this. Now, I do want to say that I didn't hate everything about the movie. There were some things I really loved about the movie. I think the sci-fi aspect of it, of them going into the suspended animation, the machine failing, that was all interesting stuff. And the visuals of it, I think they nailed it. All of the setting, the kind of the soft tones they used and everything, the soft colors, soft filters, the technology, everything was just spot on. And even though the movie it's not super old. What was it, from 2016, I think?
Yeah.
But there's no dated element to it. I think that it's classic sci-fi as far as the settings go. Everything crisp and clean, the uniforms that they wore, the clothing, like nothing was way out of whack. I think it was super tight on all of that. And the filming was really well done. The special effects were well done. So I'm not going to say that it was terrible in that way. And I think the acting was good as well for that sort of sci-fi movie. Not spectacular, but not the worst either. Like solid upper tier of sci-fi. I think it breaks down when it starts getting into the story more. And maybe that was why it was trying to do something maybe innovative, but I think that overall it just failed on that. What did you and Chris didn't talk about the aesthetics as much, and I know that you're big on aesthetics. What did you think about that in the movie?
I thought it was beautifully shot. I loved it. I mean, there's for quite some time now, there's been this like kind of drive to kind of do like space is dirty, like everything has to be dirty. I kind of blame Aliens for this, like which I really enjoy. I really enjoy that aesthetic, but for a long time, everyone tried to copy Alien, and this film was like, in the sense, you could kind of think of it as like the anti-Alien in terms of the aesthetics. Everything just looks really nice. Like it looks clean, it looks modern. The choice of coloring. I mentioned the final shot too in the film where she's swimming in the pool and they're looking out into outer space is just breathtaking. It's honestly, it was some of the better, like in terms of just pure beauty and pure art on film. Like you could take that shot of the two of them in that pool and they're looking out into outer space and just stop it there. And just, you could hang that up on your wall. It's that I do truly believe it's really stunning. It's one of the better, without like doing like a ton, right? In terms of like, oh, this expansive world or whatever. It's mainly just that ship. And there's some absolutely stunning cinematography and stunning set pieces in the film.
I really do think that they set the scene that this isn't a grungy space scene. These are upper class people, middle upper class people who are booking this flight to go to a foreign planet. Like they're not going to be on a garbage scow. They're going to be on something that's pretty nice. And I think that everything, it did set the scene for the movie, and it set the expectation for it that we want to feel comfortable, and it makes you feel comfortable in the ship. And then it starts to play with that later as Jim becomes very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You said a positive right off the bat. So what's your negative?
So for me, so in the storytelling, the real negative, I think, is one of the big negatives is that it has too many genres in there. It's sci-fi, it's romance, it's redemption, there's loss, there's action adventure, drama, a hero's journey going through all of it. So I think it got muddled right off the bat with just too many genres going on, too many different things that it was trying to get to, and it had to encapsulate all that. So then it has to have so many different plot points to make that work. I think that you and Chris too got into it, that it really did had a hardcore, and you had said, I think one of the directors was really into Carl Jung, and it clearly had that Jungian influence of the hero's journey. And I would have liked to, if you two had teased that out a little bit more. I think that when you boil this movie down, it's really a one-man play. And for about half of, maybe about a third, a little over a third of the movie, it really is a one-man play of just Jim. And every other character, even Jennifer Lawrence's character, when they bring them in, all of these characters are just essentially NPCs to Jim's hero journey. And I think that yeah, I mean, literally as far as characters go, and we'll get into this as we progress and definitely go back and listen to the other episode. you have Jim, who's the main character, and he's on his hero's journey. Then you have Aurora, played by Jennifer Lawrence. You have the mechanic, played by Lawrence Fishburne. An AI robot bartender, played by Martin Sheen, but not that Martin Sheen, a different Martin Sheen. And then you have, at the very, very end, Andy Garcia has like 2 lines as the captain, but none of them, I mean, literally, the Martin Sheen auto bartender character is an NPC. He's an AI computer. I felt like every single character was really one-dimensional to just feed into Jim's hero's journey. And I thought that so then everybody else fell flat.
Yeah, your issues with like genre mashing, like too many genres going into the thing. Like, if I don't know if you guys listen to some of our older episodes, I for the most part enjoy that type of stuff. Like, I don't listen to the very first episode me and Steve did, the Prometheus episode, because I was like really green at doing this. I kind of cringe listening to it, but like I defended Prometheus, and Prometheus people accused it of having the same problems, right? It's like, oh, it's trying to be like this religious, philosophical film, but it's also like a horror film, and it's also like this action film, and it's this big budget sci-fi thing. And I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and say like it works all the time, but like it's genre mashing. I like when stuff like mixes around with genres and plays around with genres. Like I've talked about it multiple times. Like my favorite TV show is Twin Peaks, which is famous for mixing like soap opera and horror and sappy romance and all this stuff together that, you know, on the surface of it, it doesn't seem like it works. But in that case, in my opinion, it really does work well. But I can kind of get why people don't like that. But it's something that I've always enjoyed. I've always enjoyed genre mashing. And in terms of like, you're saying like one-dimensional characters, see, I think in certain circumstances they can work, right? Like if the Lawrence Fishburne character, I can use him as an example as being like a plot device right over to drive the story forward. I don't know if I'd necessarily see it that way, but I mean, it's very effective at what he does there, you know, because really you said it's a one-man show. I mean, the movie it's 2 people, right? Everybody else is kind of there. You know, the AI robot, Arthur, I mean, he literally is an AI robot. He's an NPC. And other than like Lawrence Fishburne's character showing up, it's just them, right? It's about Aurora and it's about Jim. So, and that's just my opinion. I didn't really see much of an issue with that.
I think that the 2-man play is in one setting is an excellent way to discover different characters, but that you can't have one-dimensional character. You need to have 2 really strong characters. There's a great movie that's in a way similar to this. It's called Tape. It's from all the way back in 2001. If people want to see it, it's with Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, and 1 or 2 other characters cycle through. And those other side characters are maybe more NPC-ish, that they are just meant to carry along the plot, but they have a lot more depth than any of the side characters in this movie have. But the Uma Thurman character and Ethan Hawke's characters are both so strong, and they carry off this 2-man play to the point that you don't even think it's a 2-man play anymore because you've been completely lost in it. I think that in this movie, Jennifer Lawrence never feels in this movie that she's her own person. She always, to me, felt that she was just there to move Jim along in the plot, that it really was a one-man story and it was Jim's story, and that she didn't really matter.
I don't know. I push back against that in the sense of like when Jennifer Lawrence, when it's revealed that Jim lied or didn't tell her that he opened up the pod. I mean, and I mentioned it on the previous pod, like that look that she gives on her face, she doesn't even have to say anything, right? Like I personally, some people have issues with Jennifer Lawrence's acting. I really enjoy her acting. That look that she gives on her face, she doesn't there's no dialogue that's needed, right? Like it expresses like 1,000 different emotions that somebody would be going through in that moment right there. And I would say like there's moments where, he like lays himself down on I believe it's the bed or whatever, and he's about to, and she's gonna stab him to death or what have you with the metal rod, and she stops. I wouldn't say she's just like kind of like a passenger in Jim's journey or anything like that. I think that to me, I did truly feel that, like the love that they did have for each other, and then like the extreme hatred that she had for him afterwards, which it's believable. I thought it was believable, given this like impossible circumstance that they're in. I don't know. It's interesting you think that like her character didn't have like multi dimensions, because they give her a pretty good backstory. To me, like my biggest complaint about the film is I think it definitely could have used another 15-20 minute runtime to kind of flesh some of this stuff out. And that's all it would take, is maybe an extra 15 minutes. But they give like Aurora a pretty good backstory too, in the sense of like she's going on this ship and she's left her entire friends and family behind, and they're all going to be dead by the time that she gets to wherever she's going. And then almost immediately she's going to take a ship to go back. Basically, her goal is like, I'm going to time travel in an odd sense, and I'm going to write about how I lived in this time period, and now I'm going to be living here. And it's, but she's also just not happy too, right? Like I think that's a part of the movie that people miss out, is how unhappy Aurora is in her life. And to me, this adds depth to her character. Maybe the film could have done a better job exploring this aspect of Aurora, and maybe a little bit less focus on Jim. But I think that comes down to it. I think it just could have used a little bit longer runtime.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like James Early's Key Battles of American History podcast and many other great shows. Go over to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors.
Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Well, I think that it was already over 2 hours. I'm pretty sure it was pretty close to 2 hour runtime.
Yeah.
And I think to go to the 2 hours and 15 or 2 hours and 30 would have been just too much, where I think that if they had pared back all of the drama that they had done with the ship and all this stuff, they could have had time to more develop her. I would have loved to have heard more about that story of why she was doing that. And I think why she was deciding to go to this planet, live on the planet for like 6 months, and then go back and be asleep for 100 years and come back like essentially 300 years later or something like that to Earth. That would have been a really interesting thing to explore, and then tie that into Jim and him reawakening her. And I think they could have gotten to that if they had maybe cut back a little bit on the drama of the ship going to explode and all this working out. It just felt to me like they had taken something of little bits and pieces of all other movies. Like you get a 2001 Space Odyssey vibe of him going through that thing to save the ship. And then you get a little bit of the Shining vibe when he's always sitting at the bar. Like, I think there was a lot of dead weight that they could have trimmed out of the movie to get into those things that you were saying that that were very surface on there, that they really could have dived into it. And I think, to me, that is what sci-fi is all about, is getting into those, taking something that the big story is not, this ship that's flying through space, and it's not this asteroids crashing into the ship. It's using that one piece, that they're on a ship where you go into suspended animation in order to tell a much bigger point, which what is the real point of this story? It's a story of betrayal. That's what it is. And you could connect this to somebody who's cheated on their spouse or any other things, or a relationship that starts with betrayal and then they have to deal with that. I think all that other stuff they could have trimmed out and made a really interesting, something probably pretty different too, of a romance set in space, and they could have made that work.
Yeah, like in terms of, I see what you're saying. Like, yeah, for sure. But then I think it would be a kind of a different movie though, I think, right? Like because you need that sci-fi aspect of like the ship blowing up, right? Like, because that's a big part. Like, I think that's a big part of it is, I mean, I talked about this on the podcast too, right? Like, I mean, there has to be something wrong with the ship. Otherwise the final act just doesn't make sense. Right.
Well, I think they needed a different ending. They needed to, my sense with this movie from the get-go is that they had Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence, and they couldn't make Jim look bad at the end. They had to have Chris Pratt the hero, Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence as an couple at the end, and anything that they had to do, any snakes and curves and turns and hurdles that they had to get through to get to that ending, they were going to do, and they didn't really care about it.
See, yeah, but that, to me, you know, I talked about it on the other pod. Like, to me, the easy film would have been, I guess we could get into it in terms of like, you know, what could they have done differently with the film? Like, to me, like the easier film to make would have been like, I don't know, Jim wakes Aurora up and he's like an actual psychopath. I mean, there was that famous YouTube video where they re-edited the film or gave it a different spin where like the opening shot is Aurora wakes up and she finds Jim. And then she slowly starts realizing that Jim's like a psychopath that like woke her up. And I'm like, that would have been a very entertaining movie. Don't get me wrong. I would be really interested in seeing that. But it's almost kind of the easier story to tell, like in the sense of, I think the filmmaker really tried to do something very difficult in the sense of like, how can we take a character like Jim who did something as horrible as he did and find like, can we make a movie where the audience goes like, can forgive him? And was it successful? In my opinion, I thought it was very successful in doing it. And a lot of other people's opinions, they didn't think it was successful in doing it. The biggest complaint I saw from just reading comments and reading reviews was they didn't think that Jim struggled enough. Like he didn't like. They're like, people point to like Tom Hanks in Castaway. It's like, look at how long he was on that island for, you know, talking to that coconut. And I'm like, okay, so if he had waited 5 years or however long Tom Hanks was on that island, like, I don't know what the difference, like, to me, what's the difference if he woke her up after a year or after 5 years? He still wakes her up.
The reconciliation between them two between the two of them would have to come in some way through dialogue, through something. And I don't think that the shared adventure, I think it was just kind of corny at the end. Thinking through this movie, another podcaster who has a podcast called Twilight Histories, he had always said, Jordan Harbor's his name, sci-fi and fantasy, it needs to have one, maybe two fantastical technological elements, major plot twists, that is the thing that will make it believable. And when I was looking at this movie, it had at least, I kept following along and writing them down, and I was thinking initially it had 4 like Deus Ex Machinas or major things that came from outside of the plot or fantastical plot twists. And I counted 10 of them. You look at it. So you start off at least at one that it's on a spaceship and they're in suspended animation. So that's a plot device that they have to pick for sci-fi. Then there's the meteor or asteroid or whatever you want to call it hitting the ship, the malfunction that wakes Jim up, the Gus, the Lawrence Fishburne mechanic character, his pod wakes up and he's the one who happens to have all the codes to get to like the engineering sections of the ship to like fix it or something. Then you have multiple failures. Gus's death, multiple hull breaches, the reactor ship failures, heat shield that Jim invents to protect himself that gives him a miraculous save. Then Jim dead, revived by the auto dock, discovery of the auto dock that it's also a it doubles for us as a hibernation system. And there's only one of these auto docks for a ship of, was it 500 or 5,000 people? A lot of people. And then last but not least, then Aurora giving this dilemma of does she go into the pod or does she decide not to go into the pod? So 10, 11, 12 different plot twists. Like, I think that one thing that was really cheap, and I would wonder what you would say about this. I think it was very cheap, is the Lawrence Fishburne mechanic coming back in. He comes in and then he dies because you can't at the end have Lawrence Fishburne hanging around there as the third wheel as Adam and Eve, Aurora and Jim go off into the sunset to each other. I think that was one of the elements that really like stuck in my craw, was that whole thing with Lawrence Fishburne.
To me, okay, the one I'll grant you that they said, okay, so at the beginning, whatever, they're in hibernation. That's just storytelling. The ship gets hit by an asteroid. That's just right from the get-go, right? Like it's not like halfway through the movie and they're like, oh wait, then the ship gets hit by an asteroid or something. Like that's right from the get-go. So that's just baked into the cake, right? I'm fine with all that.
Yeah.
They do set up that the ship is overcompensating too, right? So at first it's like everything's kind of just running fine, but because like other hard drives are overcompensating to deal with the damage done by the asteroid, it's making other aspects of the ship progressively get more and more haywire. So I can go with it, other pods start malfunctioning and maybe it was like a chief engineer. Like we talked about this on the pod and I'm trying to remember a movie, like there's AI technology on this ship, right? So if the ship knew that it would need somebody who had access to, the internal hard drive, I guess, or the internal engine, they would wake somebody up. And why not the mechanic, right? Where like Jim's pod malfunctioning could be just, it just happened because the asteroid got hit. I don't know. They don't make it clear in the film. Maybe it was like the asteroid hits and then Jim's pod just opens up. They don't make it clear in the film. I guess they could have done a better job making that clear. So I can kind of go with that. The one thing I'll give you that is kind of ridiculous is the fact that they only have one medic dog for 5,000 passengers that they have on the ship. They would have at least, I would assume, probably 50, right? It wouldn't be just the one, right? That's where, like, it's pushing it a bit far, in my opinion. But I don't know. It doesn't bother me a ton.
I think the movie is just fighting back and forth between this romance element and then the action. And they're way far away from each other. And it's like the opposites of the magnet, or the trying to push those two poles of the magnet together. They can't make it work. So they're just trying to force it to work. If they had gone as this movie is a straight romance, I think it could have worked. they could have made this work as a straight sci-fi romance of and exploring in this sandbox of the kind of the ridiculousness of being stuck on this ship, of ultimate betrayal. You can think about other movies where they start off as an ultimate betrayal, where the guy says that he's like a millionaire, and then it finds out that he's just like a loser, unemployed guy, and then they find a way to work it out. And I think that if they had done that, they could have made something really interesting with all the elements that they already had in place. That, yeah, of course she's gonna be pissed off beyond all imaginations, and every right to be that way, that he's basically signed her death sentence. But she's obviously, like, they had started to build that she's a person who was really disconnected herself on Earth, that she had no problem like dropping out of Earth and leaving all of her family and friends to die. Like, they could have built that up more, that this is actually a thing, like this was a blessing of what Jim did to her. And I don't think that they ever created that enough to make it believable. And then you have the autodoc and the this and the that and the heat shield. And what it really turns into is, instead of her accepting Jim for the failed person that he is, it turns into this thing that, oh, Jim's redeemed himself because he's willing to die for Aurora. And this cheap, like, chivalry thing, when it could have been giving Aurora more of a bit of self-determination in the movie. Everything has been taken away from her for self-determination, but that could have been given back to her in a real way, not just this, oh, we've gone through this whole thing and Jim's an awesome hero. Now, oh, you can get into the auto dock and go back to sleep and leave Jim to die. And then what kind of movie is that? You know, what's Jim going to do if she jumps back and she's like, peace out, I'm getting back into the auto dock? What's the movie after that? Like, Jim just standing there as she's closes the roof on her pod? Like, of course Jim has to get the girl at the end. That's what they've been setting us up for the whole time. Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
To me, they easily could have done it where she decides, I don't think you're a monster anymore, but I can't ever forgive you for what you did. And she goes back to sleep in the pod. And Jim, in a sense, he redeems himself and the fact that he saved everybody else on the ship, right? But he could never get Aurora's love. And then for the rest of his life, spending this time on the ship, he has to think about the love that he could never get back. Almost like kind of like a divorce, right? Somebody, a spouse cheats or whatever, and it doesn't matter what that person does, they could do everything, right? But once that's broken, there's no getting it back. And they could have ended the movie like that. They really could have, and it would have been super, super depressing. And I think that ending could have really worked. Now I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, I'd been thinking about it during the week too when we were discussing doing this podcast. But now, the wheels are turning in my head, and I mean, like, man, that would have been like a sledgehammer to the heart, like a little, like it's like a little beyond the big screen or whatever. Like, I like sappy stuff, right? I love melodrama and that, that kind of genre of like sappy romance. Like, I like The Notebook. I love The Notebook. I know it sounds kind of weird if people go through my Facebook, see like some of the stuff that or even listen to this pod, some of the stuff that we've talked about on this podcast and what have you. But like, I love The Notebook, and man, that would have been devastating if she's like, I don't think you're a monster anymore, but I can't, I don't love you. for what you did. I can't love you because of what you did. And she goes to sleep. I mean, they could have done that.
And that could have been a natural outcome to this movie if they wanted to. That's where I think that the genre blending and the too many genres came in to the full effect is in the end of the movie, because when you have to have a good romance ending and a good sci-fi action ending, then you have to naturally get to this ending that I think was just kind of a letdown, where I think that if you had if you had built it out as a romance where she learns that what Jim gave her was really a gift to live her life meaningfully, not just go off to the planet, waste her time on the planet, then waste more time going back to an Earth that's nothing, like leaving an Earth that was nothing to her, going on this trip that was a nothing to her, and then going back to Earth that was a nothing, and that Jim's like stupidity and his faults allowed her to, in a way, redeem herself and to find out who she really was. I think that could have been a fantastic movie. Or the drama that they never find a way to really gel. And at the end, she's like, you know what, Jim, I learned a lot from you. I respect what you did, but I've got to go on my journey now. Click. And then Jim, comes to realize it. And the end could have been almost similar, that the captain opens up the logs and he's like, what the crap just happened here on my ship? And learns the story of Jim in a couple of artifacts or something.
Yeah.
I think either one of those would have been a much better ending than this like mashup ending that's really not a great ending to either of the genres.
Well, I mean, I think I do a pretty good defending the ending in the previous podcast, but I mean, okay, so before we kind of get into like things we could have done a little bit differently about the film, one of the biggest issues you said you had with the film was this idea of like Jim's redemption, right?
And I don't want to put words into your mouths of you and the other Chris, but I got the sense that you think that you guys were coming to the consensus that Jim was redeemed by his actions, that he did this horrifically bad thing. He essentially, he lies to her. So he not only plots, well, that's one thing that we can talk about right off the bat is I think that definitely the other Chris, and maybe we can get back him on for a rebuttal, but I think that he said that anybody would have done this, that anybody who was cast away on this ship would have brought somebody back to life, and probably would have brought back the hot Jennifer Lawrence back to animation. And I don't write it off like that. I don't think that that everybody would do that, and that in some way that makes it at least understandable. I don't think it's understandable to do that to someone. I don't think in any way, shape, or form it's understandable. And I don't think that's being like moralistic or anything. I think that honestly, most people wouldn't do that.
I don't know.
Or they wouldn't, or wait, they wouldn't do it after plotting about it. I think they maybe would have done it on a whim, but I don't think they would have gone and searched through to find the perfect person to bring back and all these things that Jim did that really looked psycho.
I don't think that most people would not have done what Jim did, in my opinion, right? I'll tell you, like, if I was in that situation, I would like to think that I wouldn't open the pod. I really do. And I've been through some like really crazy stuff in my life, and I can deal with a lot. But that situation, that was one of the reactions to the films I thought was crazy. Was everyone was so sure that they would know what they would do if they were in Jim's situation, and it just blows my mind. It's really how would you know what to do? why? I mean, what would you do in that situation? You know, I'm just being honest. I don't know what I would do. You know, and then I believe Chris was saying he would at least open up some pods because just out of necessity, right? Like, especially when things were going wrong with the ship or what have you. It's like, well, I need help, right? You know, otherwise there's something seriously wrong going on here. In terms of like you were saying, like kind of stalking Aurora, I do truthfully believe like he was looking through all those pods and he saw her and was struck by her beauty, obviously, and decided to start reading all as much as he could possibly about her before he made that decision of like, well, if I'm going to open the pod, I want to try to make sure I'm opening up, you know, the right pod, you know, like almost because in the sense, like you're without even asking them, you're kind of like almost marrying this person. Like you're going to be stuck for the rest of your life together. You want to make sure you're making the right decision. That's the way I kind of interpreted it. I do think that I did get a sense that he did fall in love with her from just reading her diaries and watching her, you know, her video blogs or whatever those things were. And I mean, it would have been, I don't know how much was actually there. Like I assume a big chunk of her writing was there too. So he was like reading her writing, you know, because she's a writer. And yeah, I don't know. People can call it stalky, I guess, stalker. I mean, I don't know. Like would I probably do something like that, similar in that situation? I know for sure I would start watching people's videos and reading whatever they had there just out of pure boredom. You're on the ship by yourself.
I don't know. I don't think it's that easy to say that, yeah, you would just do that. Just 5,000 people and it's psycho to go through to find it, like the woman who you think you're going to be able to live the rest of your life with. To me, it just, and it goes back to, this is Jim's story. This is not Aurora's story.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like it is Jim's story. Like he's the main protagonist, right? I don't take it as far as saying like Aurora doesn't have any agency in the story, as you were saying earlier. I pointed out like examples of where she does have agency and she is like a 3-dimensional character. I mean, it's an icky thought to think about, you know, like being stuck on the ship and being like, would I do that? Like, would I just, you know, would I start like reading this person's diary and like kind of falling in love with them, even though I'd never even really talked to them? But I'm not stuck on that ship. I don't know, you know, but to me, it seems like something I think a lot of people would probably do. I also think that there would be a fair amount of people, you know, because the arc of Jim was like he panics and he tries to figure out a way to get back into the pod, right? And comes to the conclusion like that's impossible. I cannot do this. So then he kind of accepts it. Well, kind of accepts it and starts, oh, this is my new life, and tries to live it a bit, and then realizes like I can't do this, and then he becomes like suicidal, up to the point where he's like within, you know, a couple feet of just jumping off the ship and killing himself. Now, I think a lot of people would probably do that and then jump off the ship and just kind of kill themselves. As you know, as rough as that sounds, I think a fair amount of people would do that. But I also think like probably a fair amount of people would probably open somebody up if they had the opportunity to do it. You know, like me, I don't. The thing too is Jim's a mechanic. Like I don't even know if I would know how to open up a pod if I wanted to. You know, I'm not I work on an auto recycler, but I'm not a mechanical engineer. I don't know anything like about like electrical stuff, right? He actually kind of had like a bit of the know-how to do this. Because I'm assuming there's no manual sitting around being like, oh, in case of emergency, open up, you know, this is how you open up another pod or whatever you.
Well, that was another element to the movie, is that Jim knew enough about how to hotwire the different systems, the entertainment system, and he knew enough how to open up another pod, but then he didn't know how to fix anything else on the ship, and he didn't know that the auto dock could also had a hibernation chamber. Like his gaps in knowledge and the things that he did know were very inconsistent. That's why they had to bring in that Lawrence Fishburne character for like 5 minutes to, be miraculously save some things. And then, oh, wait, he also has a system failure based on a medical system failure that he's going to die. Why doesn't he go into the auto dock then? I think that whole auto dock thing, and then her false dilemma at the end of whether to get into the auto dock or not. I think that all of that stuff, it just like starts to build up your disbelief to the point where it's just like, I don't even really care what happens anymore.
Well, I will say, like, with the medic doc thing, is he didn't even have access to that until Lawrence Fishburne showed up, right? Like, that was in a separate, that was in the wing of the ship that he didn't have access to. So he didn't even have a chance to look at that, right? Because their pods were just designed to put you to sleep. That's it, right? They weren't designed to do anything else. And I assume, like, with certain patients, like, say, if they've, I don't know, gone on another massive surgery or something like that, that the hibernation setting is theirs. So while they recover from their injuries. So, I mean, I can go with that. The Lawrence Fishburne character. Like, I see people's issues with it. I do. I don't think it's not as big of an issue for me personally.
And then you and Chris had gotten into an issue discussion that it really related of what if, so you change it from Jim just waking up a rando to what if Jim was laying next to his kids or his wife? Kids would have been an interesting one. Now with your wife, you're saying, and again, Chris, I'm pretty sure he said that he felt that it would have been the same thing as waking up some random person as waking up your wife, which I very much disagree with that.
Well, the way I look at it is like, okay, so I'll use like a metaphor, an example, right? Like, you and your wife, you're dating or whatever, and you ask your wife to marry you, and she says yes, and you guys decide to be together for the rest of your lives, right? You didn't ask her whether she wanted to be woken up on this pod. I mean, to get woken up out of the pod and be on the ship, stranded, just the two of you for the rest of her life. I don't think that was part of the agreement either. No, I will say it would be less worse than just a random person, right? Because this person, you kind of have like, you're married to them, right? You know them better than anybody else. I get that part of it, right? And then like kids, there's no way, even if my wife and kids were there and I decided I'm going to maybe wake up my wife, I couldn't wake up the kids. Because like, what do you tell the kids? It's like, well, we're all on the ship together, but you'll never get married. You'll never have a first kiss. You'll never do this. You'll never have friends. You're dooming them to like this, like terrible, terrible existence, which is probably one of the reasons, like in the film, like it's implied that Aurora and Jim never had kids. And I totally get why. That would be, it just, to me, it would make sense. Why they wouldn't have kids. With the kids, for sure, I couldn't do, no way, not a chance. I'd be like, it's horrible, and you'd have to sit there and walk by the pod and see them in there every single time, and it would probably drive most men to commit suicide, or most women to commit suicide, to have to deal with that. It's difficult to even imagine. But at the end of the day, it's like, you didn't ask your wife, like you asked your wife to marry you, right? You didn't ask your wife to get woken up from this pod either. And like, and and the last pod, I did mention that it's not that Jim had a moment of weakness and woke somebody up. It's his greatest evil. And I guess you can say they're interconnected, but is the fact that he took that choice away from Aurora. She didn't have a choice in the matter. He just did it.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Now think about it. If you say your wife you're on the ship, you're laying next to each other, her pod pops open and she has the knowledge to get you out of your pod, you wouldn't have wanted to been awakened?
Me personally,
Yeah.
yes, I would. But that I don't know if that's everybody's relationship though.
And I think that it in a legal sense, your spouse has that authority. Like if you're on your deathbed, your spouse has the authority to pull the plug on you. I think that I would think that it would be a no-brainer to wake up your spouse. I think that in 99.9% of the cases they would want to. And then you're going to leave it that when they wake up 80 or 90 years or whatever it is later, and they're going to know that you died having lived like another 30 years or something on the ship, and what they would have to live with that, so that they could go to this planet and do whatever you had planned to do together there.
But at the same time, it's if you say you did wake her up or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, like why did you do this? Like you condemned both of us to stay on the ship for the rest of our lives. Like we're never going to be able to do anything, right? Like eventually, like all this stuff is going to get boring, and like what about all my friends and family and all these other people or whatever that there were, say they had friends and family that were asleep in these pods too, right? Like in terms of magnitude, it's not as bad as waking up a random person, but it's still at the end of the day, you're taking away that person's agency. Somebody's on their deathbed. They're on their deathbed, right? For the most part, they're going to die anytime soon, or they're potentially brain dead. And essentially it's literally it's just a machine that's keeping them alive. I mean, I get the comparison, but it doesn't entirely work.
But your spouse, just by definition, is a person who you've given up some of your agency and your will to, and she's given up some of her will to you as well. Yeah, they're not a complete just free agent. I think that there's, to get to back to Jim and Aurora, the main thing is betrayal, and I don't see that it's a betrayal to wake up your spouse. I just don't see it. Maybe it's a bad decision, and maybe it's a decision that they wouldn't have agreed with, but I think that it's a decision that you do have some right to make, and it's not betrayal.
Well, I'll use another example. Say like a husband, I don't know, whatever. It's like cliche or whatever. He's going through a midlife crisis or whatever, and he drives in the driveway or whatever, and he's got like a Land Rover, like all the bells and whistles and everything like that, and the family's like kind of struggling by and be like, "Look at what we got, honey." And you didn't ask, you didn't run this by her at all or anything like that. It doesn't work entirely, but that's something you should ask about beforehand. It's like, hey, do you think we can afford this? I really want this car, yada, yada, yada. It's like, well, no, stop being silly. You don't need a Land Rover. You're a plumber or something. I don't know, whatever. You work in a warehouse. We can't afford this, right? That's probably what would happen. But do you understand? Does that comparison make sense to you?
I think like that one, with that one, so it's just a complete whim for him. He has the right to do it, and maybe it's a bad decision. It's a decision that he should have asked her for, and that's a decision that can ultimately hurt the family. But let's change that scenario just a little bit. Let's say that you're at your job and the owner says that he comes up to you and says that, you know what, I have this opportunity that I'm going to quadruple your pay, but you've got to go and move 5 towns over, like in 2 hours away, in order to another office of the job, and you've got to tell it to me right now. Now that's a pretty ridiculous thing, but something that it could be it's something that you have to make a snap decision on, and you can't necessarily consult your wife with. And it could be good, it could be bad. She might disagree with it, she might agree with it, but you have to make it without her input. You have the right to do that, and sometimes you may have to just do that. Maybe a better thing is like something with like the kids, like in the hospital, and you can't get in touch with her, and this surgery, it could work or they could die on the table. And you've got to make this decision now. There's no time to go and consult over it. You have to make it. And it is in your moral, legal purview to make decisions like that without a full consultation, because you have to impute some of what her motivations are. And with your own spouse, you know a lot more of how they're motivated than you would with, say, Aurora, who's just completely a random person who Jim thinks he's known because he's watched her vlogs.
Yeah. It's to me, this is one of the reasons I like the film too, right? Because you can have conversations like this, and like what is actually the right decision and what's. I still stand by the fact that, like, it is such a magnitude, like by a million, life altering decision, and at the end of the day, you're not asking her. As well as we know our significant others, and me and Steve are quite lucky in the sense of, like, we have like very happy marriages. I still don't know my wife 100%. Truthfully, I don't. And she doesn't know me 100% either, right? You can't really inhabit the mind of another person. You can understand others better than other people, obviously, right? Especially, with close proximity and, the type of relationship that you have. But truthfully, you don't 100% know exactly what they would want. You have a better idea than most. I'll give you that.
And you would say that you have a moral authority to make a decision on her behalf.
In this particular circumstance of, like, should I open the pod or not? Like, I don't know if I have that. I really don't. I can't say. I don't know. I can't say with 100% certainty either way. I really can't. I can't say with, like, feel morally right in the sense of my pod malfunctioned, so now I'm going to have to wake my wife pod up too, and we're both going to be stuck on the ship for the next, I think it was like 100 years or something, or 90 years, effectively like sentencing her to prison on this ship.
But so that is what I'm kind of getting at here is that you do have the moral authority to make that decision, to either say, yes, I'm going to leave her in the pod, or no, I'm going to leave her in the pod, that you legitimately would have that choice.
Yeah.
Where with Aurora, he really didn't legitimately have the authority or the anything to make that decision for her.
No.
Because with your wife, it could be the wrong decision, it could be the right decision. It could be, oh, Chris, pick up dinner on the way home. You have a choice of Burger King or Pizza Hut. And she's like, what the hell? You came home with Pizza Hut? I love Burger King.
Yeah.
But that was your right to make that decision, whether it wound up being a wrong one or the right one or the wrong one at the end. That was your right to make that decision.
Honestly, I'm fascinated with what the audience thinks. Like, let us know, like, what do you think about this discussion? I'm fascinated in what people think about the perspective that I'm having with this and Steve's perspective on this, because it really is, man, I know we're keeping it kind of nice and light, but, like, man, it's really, like, dark, like the discussion that we're having, just like right underneath the surface. And I'm fascinated in hearing what other people have to say in terms of, like, would you wake your wife up or not wake your wife up? I guess you could use girlfriend too, right? Depending on how long you guys have been dating for and what have you. But it doesn't really matter, right? Like, you've been dating for 15 years. Like, my response would be like, why didn't you get married? Why aren't you married? But
well, then digging into another really deep, dark hole of decision making and a questioning is, now, I think you and Chris were getting to this, and I don't want to misinterpret what you were saying, but I think the movie definitely gets this to Aurora changes her, at least in my eyes, that she changes her thought pattern on Jim from, like, pure hatred to grudging love and endearment is through his sacrifice for her. He does something really lousy, but then he does something really good to save the ship, and those kind of cancel each other out on the redemption meter. And it was maybe it didn't even cancel out. It like got him slightly above. And then, oh, okay, now I love Jim. Is that what we were supposed to feel? Is that how Jim redeemed himself, is by doing a selfless act?
No, I think what the film is trying to get across, and I thought it did a pretty good job, was the fact that so before the lie comes out, right? Like all those interactions, they're all genuine, right? Like they're all genuine, like in the sense of she doesn't know that. She just knows that her pod woke up and she's with this guy. And, I do truly believe that, like, that they started falling in love with each other, and then the lie comes out, obviously. And she's, thoughts are racing through her head. Like, am I dealing with a psychopath? Am I dealing with, Ted Bundy light? And also I'm dealing with the fact that she's dealing with a broken heart. Him like saving everybody else on the ship and saving the ship, and up to the point that he's willing to sacrifice his own light to do it, is supposed to be symbolic. It's supposed to be her like kind of realizing, like, you know what, like, he's not a monster. He made a decision, like this extreme circumstance and weakness, and everybody has their weaknesses. And she begins to realize, like, all the things that I felt for him before were real. And he is that guy. He's not a psycho. He's not a lunatic. He's not Ted Bundy. He's not any of these things. He was a guy who made a decision in a moment of weakness. And like, look at what he's willing to kill. He's willing to kill himself at this to save everybody else on this ship. And the only reason he's willing to do this, and people say, well, this is self-serving, right? But like, if he didn't actually love Aurora, why would he even bother trying to save the ship? Even then, he wouldn't have been able to do it, and by himself, it just would have been impossible. And he probably would have killed himself before that happened, and then this ship would have just exploded and they all would have died anyways. I mean, truly what it's showing is the love that two people can have for each other. Like, just two people, just two regular everyday people, has the potential of saving in thousands of lives, whether directly or indirectly. And I said something, and maybe it's the sappy side of me, but I do truly believe that. I do really, truly believe that. Like, all this stuff going on in like Israel and Palestine and what have you, I do truly believe, like, you see, like, say maybe like a Palestinian and an Israeli, like it's a girl and a guy or what have you, and they're like in love, and people see that and they go, like, what are we doing? And it's not going to end the war, but it's a step in the right direction.
I think they could have gotten to that, and that's where we can wrap up today with just some different ways they could have gone with this movie and some different endings. I think that whole action scene at the end was not necessary, or maybe Jim did need to get killed at the end in order to prove himself to Aurora. And then somehow, if we're just going to keep throwing in plot twists, is that, she sees that the auto dock she can get into that medical chamber and go back into hibernation somehow after Jim gets toast or something like that. I think that, I don't know, I think that end, the happily ever after ending, where they have become almost like a new Adam and Eve, just, I don't know, it just didn't hit. I felt it was just kind of corny and just kind of cheap, like just sugary, like eating your donut at the end of having eaten a whole bunch of donuts already. It was like, yeah, it's an ending.
I love the ending. I talked about that on the last pod. how they decided to end it, which is so, it sounds weird like me saying that because I'm like the horror guy and I'm like, oh yeah, we got to do this movie. And it's always like super depressing stuff. Like I send books to Steve to read and it's just like, man, like, how do you read this stuff all the time? But I love the ending for this one. But like, I had like a couple of different ideas. Like I like your idea, like say Jim dies and she goes to sleep in the hibernation and then we get a shot of her like, she's writing the book. That's the book, right? Is the love
Yeah,
her and
that's the
Jim
book.
had for each other, and she goes on to become this best selling author or whatever. I also had like another idea that was like kind of floating in my head in the sense of like, don't change anything about the movie, right? Just keep it all as it is. And then like the final shot is say like Jim as like an old man and he has written a book because he knows that Aurora's an author and likes reading. And he wrote, what you find out is he's been reading that story to her that he wrote about all this events on the ship as like his love letter to her. And he just leaves it on like top of her pod. So when she wakes up, she'll read it. I thought that would have been a nice ending too.
Yeah, I think that like an old Jim writing it right before. Yeah, I think that would have been great. Yeah, I think that in the end, this movie really it had a lot of promise. If it had just picked a couple of things and ran with those and not tried to do everything, that's why it had to have so many plot twists and turns and devices that made it drag on, is that it didn't pick something and run with it. That's what I think in the end.
Yeah, well, you're not in the minority in that, right? There's a lot of people that have like certain issues with the film. There's a lot of people that defend it too. But I mentioned on the previous pod too, it's one of these interesting films that like, as soon as it came out, everyone was like, man, there's like such a great movie here. If they only just like did this slightly different. And I really love like the film that they ended up making. And I do truly believe that was the difficult film to make. I really do. How can they find a way to have the audience forgive Jim? And in my opinion, I think they did a successful job in doing that. Now, I've read other reviews and read, other people's comments and stuff like that. And, they have issues in the sense that they think the film failed in doing that. I think they're wrong. And I did like an hour and a half podcast describing why I think they did it right. So people are, welcome to listen to that.
And I do think that you're right in a way. I think they didn't make the hard movie to make would have been cutting out the sci-fi action and making it a true space romance and Jim finds redemption through his love with Aurora, and Aurora comes to the realization through time and through dialogue and through acting that Jim really is, that he brought out something in her that she desperately needed. And I think they could have done that movie, and that I think that honestly, if that would have been the hard movie to make, I think that would have been the hard movie to sell to an audience that's expecting a Chris Pratt movie where he's the action man, and it really just turns into kind of a tearjerker romance. But I think like that, set in space, that would have been fantastic. And I think it would have hit the points that you really loved in this movie. I think it would have done it in a much more interesting way.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about, actually, in terms of just kind of tightening everything up. Like I said on the podcast, like I said, I what did I call it? I think I said a flawed masterpiece. And like, that can be interpreted in a lot of ways in terms of, how flawed, right? It's like, it's not, 2001 Space Odyssey, right? Like it's not at that level, right? I think there was like a really, really, really good film here. If they, maybe did a couple things slightly different, and maybe an example that you were saying, maybe those are one of the things they could have done differently. Like, to me, my biggest complaint is I would have liked a little bit longer running time to explore Aurora's backstory and Jim's moral struggle. I was also thinking about it too, in the sense of this story would maybe have worked really well as a book, because you could really get into Jim's head and you could really get into Aurora's head, which in film you don't really have an opportunity to do that. It's a different medium, right? It's you have to express these things in terms of like facial expressions and lighting and music and all that stuff. And actually, well, now that you mentioned, the music is probably one of my favorite parts of the film. I absolutely love the score for this film. It's sappy, but it won an Oscar. So obviously, people are fairly intelligent about film and film scores in general thought it was really well too, right? I think it blows my mind that actually that did win an Oscar, because the film itself was lukewarmly received. And typically that doesn't happen. Like, it's usually like a film that's well received ends up winning Oscars, I wonder how often that's happened. I'd have to look that up.
We talked about this movie for an hour and a half in a previous episode, for over an hour today for a movie that was about 2 hours long. So we definitely would love to hear what you think about this movie. And if you have ideas for other movies that you think are challenging like this, or that you have a completely different idea than almost anybody else does, send in those ideas and we will talk to you next time.